They said the children went in laughing, lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the midnight air, their bare feet whispering against the ancient stone path. But when they returned at dawn, their voices were gone, and so was their youth. Faces once soft and bright were now hollow, twisted, lined with decades they had never lived. Their eyes, those same innocent eyes, now carried the weight of lifetimes. Some died within days, their hearts unable to bear the sudden collapse of time. Others simply disappeared. You weren't meant to know this story. You weren't meant to know that such places exist, or that the garden was real. Even now, whispers of it are buried deep in the archives of vanished empires, locked away by men who understood the danger of what lay inside. But I will tell you, because once you hear, you cannot go back. The garden stood beyond the ruins of an abandoned citadel in Persia, shrouded by walls of black stone that seemed to drink in the moonlight. Locals called it Bagimana, the Garden of Denial. No one could explain why its air shimmered unnaturally in the night, or why its gates could only be seen when the full moon crested the mountains. They only knew this: the garden did not belong to men, it belonged to something older. But this story is not simply about a cursed place. This is about power, ancient power, power that elites have coveted for millennia, because if a place can drain years from children, it can give those years to someone else. Do you understand what that means? In 1873, Persia's rulers knew, so did their secret patrons in Europe, and that's why the garden was never destroyed. You see, history likes to tell you that time is a fixed river, that death comes for us all in the same way, but there are doors, hidden, dangerous doors that the powerful have always known how to open. The garden was one such door, and the children, they were never supposed to be the ones who walked through. Now, I must warn you, the deeper we go, the harder it is to unsee. This knowledge is not for the faint-hearted, but if you stay, if you commit, you will begin to see the invisible hands shaping the world around you. Are you ready to step into the garden? The night they entered, the moon was swollen and pale, hanging above the mountains like a silent judge. The children didn't know they were trespassing. Their parents had warned them about the old citadel, but curiosity is a dangerous force, especially when something calls to you, and the garden was calling. Eyewitnesses from the village spoke of a sound, faint and hypnotic, rising from beyond the walls. It was like music, but not the kind any human could play. Low vibrations that seeped into the bones, luring the young like a predator's hum. By the time the parents realized their children were missing, the gates had already vanished behind them. But what happened inside was worse than anyone could imagine. Survivors, if you can call them that, spoke of an endless canopy of black trees whose roots formed intricate patterns across the ground. The air was thick, almost liquid, humming with a strange energy that made their hearts race and their skin prickle. One boy described stepping on soil so soft it felt alive. Another claimed he saw figures, tall, inhuman silhouettes, moving just out of sight, their glowing eyes tracking every step. And then came the changes. The first signs were small. A sudden ache in the joints, hair turning brittle and grey, their laughter fading into confusion. Hours passed, and the changes accelerated. Skin sagged, muscles wasted away. Their bodies betrayed them as if decades of time had been poured into a single night. What force could do this? Science had no answers, and those who sought the truth were silenced. But fragments of ancient texts, hidden in crumbling archives, suggest the garden wasn't a curse. It was a mechanism, a tool, something designed to take life from one and give it to another. Think about that. If life can be drained, it can also be transferred. Imagine what such power would mean to a king who feared death, or to a secret order willing to sacrifice the innocent for eternal dominion. Do you really think they would leave such a treasure untouched? The villagers tried to burn the garden, but fire would not take. Its walls absorbed the flames like a sponge, and as night fell again, the gates returned, waiting for the next willing soul. You're beginning to see, aren't you? This isn't just about children or a forgotten Persian ruin. This is about the system that decides who lives, who dies, and who thrives forever. When the first whispers of the garden reached the royal court in 1873, they did not react with fear, they reacted with hunger. Imagine sitting on a throne built on centuries of blood and conquest, knowing death will one day rip it from your grasp. Then someone tells you of a place that can take years from one life and grant them to another. The Shah's advisors moved quickly, dispatching secret envoys to the remote citadel where the children had aged overnight. The villagers who tried to warn them were silenced. Entire families disappeared in the following weeks. Official records claimed a famine had swept through the valley, but those who lived long enough to speak in whispers knew the truth. The garden had been claimed. And it wasn't just the Persians. European envoys arrived soon after, men with pale faces and darker intentions. They carried letters sealed with the crests of dynasties that still control empires today. These men understood the mechanism. They had seen it before in other parts of the world, in other forgotten ruins. Some say this is why secret societies, cloaked in ritual and blood, thrive in every era. They guard places like the garden and use them to feed their own. The villagers watched as armed guards erected barriers around the citadel, sealing it from the eyes of the world. Caravans slipped in and out at night, carrying what the villagers believed were prisoners, condemned men and women who would never be seen again. The locals called them offerings, but it went deeper than that. Ancient texts, later smuggled out by a defecting royal scribe, revealed that the garden was not just a fountain of stolen life, it was a contract. Someone or something had built it, its creators demanded a price, and those who controlled it understood this price could be negotiated with the right sacrifices. Do you see the pattern? Every time in history when the peoples, powerful, consolidate their strength, ordinary people vanish. Wars, plagues, disasters, they're not just random, they're mechanisms, and the garden was one of their earliest prototypes. But here's the question you must ask yourself. If such a place existed 150 years ago, what makes you think it isn't still active, hidden, and feeding? The first time the Shah's men entered the garden, they didn't come with children. They came with criminals, shackled men and women dragged from the dungeons of Tehran, accused of treason, theft, or simply being inconvenient to those in power. They were told they were being exiled. None knew they were walking into something far worse. Witness accounts, pieced together from smuggled journals, describe how the prisoners were pushed past the gates as soldiers stood watch. What happened next was as methodical as it was monstrous. Time began to devour them. One prisoner was seen clutching his hair in terror as it turned to white strands within minutes. Another's skin cracked like old parchment before their body collapsed into dust. But not all the victims aged into death. Some merely weakened, their bodies trembling with exhaustion as if life itself had been bled away. And here's the part they never wanted you to know. When those victims returned from the garden half dead, the Shah's closest advisors stepped forward and touched them. Witnesses claim the rulers' faces grew brighter, healthier, their hands steady and strong as the life they siphoned transferred directly into their veins. It was no longer just a legend. The garden was a weapon, a tool of immortality, and those who controlled it would never give it up. Soon more prisoners were taken. Then orphans from distant towns. Caravans left the capital every week, carrying dozens who would never be seen again. Records show that during this period, members of the royal court appeared inexplicably rejuvenated, their lifespans stretching beyond what was natural for the time, and yet the elite were not the only ones who benefited. Quiet deals were made with European families, old bloodlines with vast fortunes. In exchange for wealth, influence, and secrecy, they too would have access. But the garden had its own rules. Its mechanisms could not be abused endlessly. If the balance of life taken and life given tipped too far, the texts warned, a reckoning would follow. The Shah dismissed these warnings as superstition. He would regret it, because on the night of the summer solstice, the garden changed. Its gates opened wider than ever before, and something that had been sleeping within began to stir. The soldiers guarding the garden reported it first. a low vibration that rippled through the ground like the approach of a storm. The air thickened, humming with a frequency they could feel in their teeth. The prisoners huddled near the gates began to scream, and then the walls moved. Those who were there swore the garden was alive. Its black stone gates didn't open. They breathed. The ancient trees inside shifted as though stirred by some unseen wind, and roots slithered across the soil like hunting serpents. A soldier named Farouk, one of the few to survive, described hearing a voice. Not human, not even close. It spoke no language he knew, yet he understood its meaning clearly. More. That night, the garden devoured everything within its reach. Prisoners and soldiers alike were pulled into the earth, their screams cut short. Only a handful managed to escape and crawl back to the Shah's fortress, their hair white, their bodies trembling with an age they had not earned. But here is the detail that was erased from history. One man did not run. An advisor named Nader, a man loyal only to power, stepped forward. He offered himself, but not to die. He made a bargain. Witnesses claim they saw him kneel, hands pressed into the living soil, as if praying to the garden itself. The next morning the garden's gates had closed again, as silent as stone, and Nader, he returned to court, but he was not the same. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark halls of the citadel, and his voice carried a resonance that froze those who heard it. Within weeks, the Shah himself bowed to his counsel. It was no longer the Shah who ruled, it was the garden, through Nader. And this is where the story becomes truly dangerous, because from that moment forward, the garden was no longer a secret buried in a Persian valley. Its influence spread like a root system beneath the world's great empires. Europe, the Ottoman elite, hidden networks of power-hungry men who understood that the garden was more than a source of stolen life. It was a teacher. And what it taught them is the very system you live under today. Nader's return from the garden marked a turning point, though few alive at the time understood the magnitude. He began whispering new doctrines to the Shah's court, rituals of secrecy, the importance of symbols, and a methodical way to shape the minds of the masses without their knowledge. He called it rooting, the same way the garden extended its roots beneath the soil, unseen yet all-controlling. The first phase was fear. The Shah's soldiers imposed new laws, punishing even the smallest infractions with public humiliation and death. The people, desperate for safety, became pliable. Nader then introduced distraction, festivals, grand spectacles, and ceaseless war against neighboring tribes. When fear dulled the people's senses and distraction consumed their attention, Nader tightened his grip, weaving networks of spies, informants, and ritualized loyalty oaths into every corner of Persian life. But here's the truth they'll never teach you in any history class. The garden wasn't just a place, it was a philosophy. Nader learned from it. The garden drained life slowly, methodically, until its prey was too weak to fight back. Now, he was applying the same system to humanity itself. The masses would be drained not of years, but of will, until they could no longer resist the elite. This doctrine spread far beyond Persia. European patrons who visited the Shah's court carried it back to their own nations, embedding the garden's philosophy into monarchies, banking systems, and emerging secret orders. These organizations, whose symbols you still see carved on government buildings and banknotes today, were built on Nader's teachings. And as they grew, they realized something even darker. People could be made to love their servitude if you offered them illusions of choice, bread and circuses, false freedoms, the appearance of control, while every decision led them deeper into the garden's root system. The Shah believed he was ruling a stronger, more obedient empire, but in reality the garden was ruling through him. Its philosophy had taken hold. Look around you. Can you see it? The same fear, the same distractions, the same web tightening around your life, unseen but inescapable. This is why the garden was never destroyed. It didn't need to remain in Persia. It's here now, in ways you were never meant to recognize. By the late 19th century, the garden's philosophy had infiltrated Europe. It didn't arrive with armies or invasions. It arrived in whispers, carried by men who looked like merchants, bankers, and diplomats. They attended lavish balls in London, secret meetings in Vienna, and candlelit gatherings in Paris. Behind closed doors, they spoke of a rooted empire, one that would stretch across nations without ever being seen. One family in particular, already wealthy beyond comprehension, became the garden's most devoted stewards. They began financing wars not to win, but to indebt entire governments. They funded both sides, ensuring that no matter who claimed victory, they owned the outcome. Sound familiar? It should. The same banking cartels born in that era still control your economy today. But it wasn't just money. European royalty, aging and desperate, were given private access to the garden itself. Witnesses, few who survived, spoke of clandestine midnight journeys into the Persian mountains, where cloaked figures carried withered nobles through the gates and returned them days later, vibrant and full of vigor. What price did they pay? Prisoners, orphans, the expendable. The garden had become a global machine. But like all machines, it required maintenance. The elites realized they couldn't rely on one physical location forever, too much risk. So they began replicating its principle. Instead of one garden draining life in the Persian desert, they created metaphoric gardens everywhere. Factories that worked men to death, colonial systems that extracted resources and destroyed indigenous culture, institutions that molded young minds into obedient cogs. These were modern gardens, places designed to harvest energy, time, and vitality from the many, to empower the few. And the people complied. They believed the wars were patriotic, the labor was noble, the schools were virtuous. Just as the children once walked into the Persian garden laughing, unaware of what awaited them, so too did entire nations step willingly into this new system. But here's the detail that should keep you awake tonight. The garden was never about draining people completely. Dead subjects are useless. The system is designed to keep you alive just long enough to be harvested again, and again, and again. Do you feel it now? That slow erosion of freedom, the quiet exhaustion that seems to deepen each year. That's not an accident. It's a design. An ancient design that began in a forbidden garden you were never meant to know existed. The next targets weren't kings or soldiers, they were children. The garden stewards understood that if you could shape the young, you would shape the future, and you'd never need to rule by force again. So they turned their attention to education. Across Europe and the Americas, modern school systems emerged seemingly overnight. They were praised as revolutionary, but they carried the garden's blueprint. Obedience over curiosity, repetition over critical thought, standardized conformity over true learning. Classrooms became small gardens, draining individuality and replacing it with programmed loyalty. It didn't stop there. Religion, once a source of solace and community, was quietly co-opted. Dogma was hardened, fear was amplified, and the masses were taught to look upward to institutions for salvation rather than inward for strength. Church leaders who resisted were discredited or eliminated, their congregations absorbed into more manageable systems. Identity itself became a tool. New national borders divided once unified cultures. People were taught to see themselves not as free beings but as subjects of a state, forever indebted to powers they could not see. This wasn't about governance. It was about harvesting energy through allegiance, guilt, and fear. And while the masses were reshaped, the elites refined their methods. They learned to use symbols, simple ancient markings that bypassed the rational mind and spoke directly to the subconscious. These symbols appeared everywhere, in architecture, in flags, in the emblems of banks and governments, each one a reminder of who truly held the power. Do you think this stopped in the 19th century? Look around you. What do you see on your currency, on corporate logos? Why do the same patterns repeat over and over again across continents and centuries? Because the garden stewards know that symbols root themselves deep in the human psyche. They tell you silently and invisibly that you are owned. This is how the Forbidden Garden grew into a global network, not through swords or guns, but through minds shaped from birth. By the time a man realized he was in the system, it was already too late. But here's the truth. They fear you'll discover. Once you see the roots, you can begin to sever them. And if enough men do that, the entire garden collapses. The question is, will you? By the dawn of the 20th century, the garden stewards had perfected their art. They had drained individuals, they had reshaped nations, but now they needed more life, more energy, more fear. So they turned to the most efficient harvesting mechanism ever devised by man: war. Don't believe the history books. Most wars are not fought for freedom or justice. They are engineered crises, designed to funnel resources, collapse economies, and drain the vitality of entire populations. World War I was their masterpiece. Millions marched willingly into slaughter, convinced by propaganda that they were fighting for honor. In reality, they were walking into a garden without walls. Every bomb that fell, every child orphaned, every man broken on the battlefield fed the system. Industries boomed, central banks tightened their grip, and borders were redrawn to better suit the hidden network's control. And just as the bodies piled up, the elites grew stronger. They sold weapons to both sides. They dictated peace treaties that guaranteed future conflict. They thrived on chaos because chaos kept the masses afraid and distracted. Do you see the pattern yet? It isn't just about blood. War drains generations. Fathers lost, sons traumatized, mothers broken by grief. It's an energetic harvest, and when the smoke clears, the victors are never the soldiers who fought. It's the same families, the same institutions, the same shadowy hands that profited from Persia's garden centuries before. And when war isn't enough, they create invisible battles, economic collapses, manufactured pandemics, ideological divides that turn neighbors into enemies, anything to keep humanity fractured, fearful, and dependent. The garden taught them well. A terrified population is a controllable population, and as long as the masses remain distracted by the fires the elites ignite, they will never look up to. See who's holding the match. But this knowledge cuts both ways. If you can see the pattern, you can break it, and that is why they work so hard to keep you blind. Because once a man understands how the garden operates, he stops walking willingly into the slaughterhouse. He begins to step out of the system, and that is the greatest threat the elites have ever faced. When the world wasn't at war, the garden stewards needed another tool to keep the masses compliant. They found it in something far more seductive than bullets or bombs: entertainment. In the early 20th century, the rise of film, radio, and later television was celebrated as progress. But behind the curtain, the garden's philosophy was guiding every step. They understood the power of stories, how they could shape values, distract the mind, and plant ideas that would bloom years later. Entire industries were constructed not just to entertain, but to program. Heroes and villains were chosen carefully. Narratives reinforced obedience to authority, glorified war when it was profitable, and mocked anyone who questioned the system. Even the music you listened to wasn't just about rhythm, it was a frequency game designed to dull critical thought and amplify addictive behaviors. By the 1950s, media wasn't simply reporting events, it was manufacturing reality. False enemies were created, social movements were infiltrated and redirected. Political scandals were orchestrated to swap one puppet for another, while the true hands of power remained untouched. And the public, hypnotized by screens and headlines, never realized they were being led deeper into the roots of the garden. But the most brilliant tactic was this. The stewards turned entertainment into an escape. They gave you just enough pleasure, just enough distraction, that you stopped asking the questions that mattered. Bread and circuses, streaming and scrolling, lights, sounds, dopamine hits on demand, while the system continued draining your time, your energy, and your very sense of self. And make no mistake, the garden stewards understood psychology. They knew men crave significance, so they built entire cultures that sold false significance: celebrity worship, status games, shallow materialism, each man chasing validation that would never come, too exhausted to notice the chains tightening around him. Do you see how deep the roots go? War, education, religion, media, different branches, same tree, and all of it is designed to keep you from discovering the garden's true purpose. Because if enough men awaken, if they see the pattern clearly, the entire system collapses overnight. The question is, will you keep scrolling, keep consuming, keep aging inside their garden, or will you break free? The garden's roots have always adapted, but nothing expanded its reach like technology. What began as secret meetings in candlelit rooms has now become a digital web that stretches into every corner of your life. At first, the machines seemed harmless, even helpful. Radios, telephones, computers, tools to connect the world. But the garden stewards were already thinking decades ahead. They understood that whoever controls the flow of information controls perception, and whoever controls perception controls reality itself. Surveillance systems were quietly embedded into everything. Cameras on every street corner, microphones in your devices, algorithms mapping your every thought. You're watched not just by governments but by private corporations, fronts for the same old bloodlines that once guarded the garden's gates in Persia. But here's the sinister genius. They don't even need to force you anymore. You willingly carry the tools of your own control in your pocket. You tell them what you like, what you fear, who you trust, and who you hate. Every search, every click, every word you type is another offering to the digital garden, feeding it the data it needs to keep you locked in. And the harvest is no longer just your energy or your time. It's your identity, your memories, your preferences, your deepest weaknesses, all catalogued, analyzed, and used to manipulate you in ways you cannot even detect. Do you think the advertisements you see, the recommended videos you're fed, the trending topics that rise and fall each day are organic? No, they are chosen for you, selected by a machine whose sole purpose is to keep you distracted, divided, and docile. This is the garden's final evolution. You don't need walls when the prison is invisible. You don't need guards when the prisoners police themselves. And you don't need chains when the captive believes he is free. But here's what they don't want you to know. A man who understands how the system works can begin to break it. He can turn their tools against them. He can refuse to feed the roots. The question is, will you? Because the deeper we go, the more dangerous this knowledge becomes. And once you see what's at the center of the garden, there's no turning back. To understand how to break the garden's grip, you must first know where it came from. And this is where the story becomes dangerous, because the garden was not built by men. Ancient texts, scattered across Mesopotamia and Persia, speak of beings who descended long before recorded history. They were called by many names: Anunnaki, Watchers, Shining Ones, but they all share the same description: tall, radiant, and utterly alien. They arrived with technology and knowledge beyond anything humanity could comprehend, and they offered gifts: agriculture, architecture, the secrets of the stars. But their generosity was not without price. The texts hint at a covenant, an exchange. Humanity would provide something the beings craved, something only mortal life could offer. They called it essence, our life force. The first gardens were not lush sanctuaries, they were containment fields, living laboratories where essence could be harvested, concentrated, and redirected. These beings showed select humans how to operate the mechanism. Kings, priests, and early rulers were initiated into the secret. In exchange for loyalty, they were granted power, longevity, and dominance over their tribes. But something changed. Some of the Watchers vanished. Others turned against each other, and humanity was left with fragments of the original system. Those fragments became the hidden traditions of secret orders, the bloodlines who still guard the roots of the garden today. This is why the elites move in ritual, why they carve symbols into stone and paper, why they drain the masses in ways that go beyond the physical. They are imitating the original designers, keeping the machine alive in hopes of summoning its masters back, or perhaps becoming them. Think about this the next time you see global leaders gathered under the same ancient symbols. The garden didn't start in 1873 Persia. That was just a rediscovery, a reactivation. Its roots reach back thousands of years, older than your nations, older than your religions, and those roots are still alive. But here is the truth they fear most. A man who understands the origin of his prison can begin to escape it. Because once you see that the walls are illusions, the doors begin to appear. And now that you know where the garden came from, you're ready to see what it's building next. The garden stewards are no longer content with slow harvests. They believe they are approaching the final stage, a harvest so complete it will reshape humanity forever. For over a century, they have been laying the groundwork. First, they centralized power. Governments, banks, media, and corporations all fused into one vast interlocking system. Then they built the infrastructure, satellites, data centers, and digital networks that reach into every home. Now they have begun the last phase, fusing man with machine. So the harvest will be perpetual. You've already seen the signs: digital IDs, social credit systems, artificial intelligence that predicts your behavior before you even make a choice, biometric tracking embedded in devices you cannot live without, all framed as convenience, as safety, and progress. But the truth is simple: once you are connected to their network, you will never be able to disconnect. And here is the part most men refuse to believe. They are not just harvesting your data. They are learning how to harvest your essence directly. The elites know that fear, despair, and conflict produce energy they can channel and consume. Wars and crises are no longer enough. They are experimenting with technologies that draw on human biology in ways even the Watchers would have envied. Devices that monitor your emotions, algorithms that trigger chemical responses in your brain. Soon, they won't need the Persian garden or its walls. Your entire life will be the garden. Do you feel that slow exhaustion, that creeping sense of hopelessness? That's not an accident. They are testing the system right now. Every new emergency, every sudden outrage is a calibration, pushing humanity deeper into compliance. And when the final switch is flipped, the harvest will be permanent. There will be no escape because you won't even know you are trapped. But here is the secret they don't want you to hear. They can't do it without your consent. Even silent consent feeds the garden. That's why awareness is dangerous to them. That's why this message is dangerous. Because once you see the trap being built around you, you can refuse to step inside, and that refusal terrifies them. To understand who is preparing the final harvest, you must look past presidents and parliaments. These are stage actors. The true stewards of the garden operate in the shadows, bound by blood and secrecy. Historical records, when you dig past the propaganda, show the same families surfacing again and again. They funded both sides of the Napoleonic Wars. They controlled the central banks of Europe. They financed the industrial revolutions that enslaved entire populations to machines. These names never leave the game. They simply change masks. They hide behind trusts, foundations, and corporations. Their faces rarely appear on magazine covers, and their signatures seldom touch official documents. But their influence is everywhere. They choose which technologies you're allowed to use and which are buried. They decide which wars will erupt and which movements will be amplified to fracture the public further. And here's what will shatter your illusion. They are not divided. You are taught to believe in political parties, ideological battles, left versus right, nation against nation. But behind closed doors, the bloodlines dine together. They marry into one another's families. They meet in estates and castles whose existence you will never know. These families are not just wealthy, they are initiated. They guard the fragments of ancient knowledge passed down from the first garden's creators, and they believe they are chosen, heirs to a legacy that sets them apart from the rest of humanity. But this belief comes at a cost. The bloodlines live in constant fear of losing their grip. They know that if enough men awaken to the garden's design, the entire structure will collapse overnight. That's why they are racing to complete the final harvest before you see the truth. And now, you're beginning to see it. You're starting to recognize the faces, the symbols, the patterns. That's not by accident. You're waking up. But awareness alone is not enough. You must decide what you will do with this knowledge, because the garden is preparing to close its gates for good. And when it does, those who are still inside will not walk out. Why are the bloodlines so obsessed with control? It's not just greed, it's not just power, it's fear of death. The forbidden garden of Persia showed them that life essence could be extracted and transferred, but even that method was imperfect. Some gained decades, even centuries of vitality, but they could never stop the clock completely. And for the elite, mortality is the greatest failure imaginable. That's why they built empires, hoarded wealth, and wove themselves into every institution. They are trying to outlast time itself. And when they realized that stolen life alone wouldn't make them immortal, they turn to other methods: cloning, genetic engineering, cryogenic suspension, whispered experiments in underground labs you will never see. These aren't the fantasies of fiction, they're documented projects hidden behind layers of classified secrecy. Billions are poured into life extension technology while the public is distracted by meaningless debates and celebrity scandals. But the greatest obsession is digital immortality, uploading consciousness into machines. They believe that if they can fully merge human biology with artificial intelligence, they will finally escape the limitations of flesh. They won't need the garden anymore because they will become the garden, eternal, untouchable above the rest of humanity. Here is the irony they cannot face. In trying to cheat death, they have made themselves less alive. They operate in cold calculation, unable to feel the vitality they crave. That is why they drain others, through wars, through manufactured crises, through the endless fear they pump into the population. It is the only thing that keeps their brittle existence from collapsing. And now, they're closer than ever to locking the rest of humanity into the same prison. The final harvest will not just steal your time and energy, it will take your very ability to choose. But there is something they did not anticipate. The deeper they push, the more men awaken. And each man who awakens weakens the garden's roots. This is why you're hearing this now. Because you are not meant to be harvested, you are meant to be free. Listen carefully. What I'm about to say is not just a story detail. This is the point where everything changes. The garden's final harvest is accelerating. Every day the roots tighten. New restrictions, new crises, new technologies that blur the line between human and machine. The bloodlines are betting that you will stay asleep until it's too late, but they are wrong. Because some of you are already waking up, and once a man wakes up, he cannot go back. But awareness alone isn't enough. You must declare that you will not be harvested. This declaration is more powerful than you think. It creates identity, and identity is the one thing the garden cannot drain. Here's what I need you to do right now. Comment the phrase, "I step out of the garden," twice below this video. Once for yourself, once for the men still asleep. Do it immediately, because every man who writes it locks in his refusal to be controlled, and the algorithm will push this truth further where others can see it. This isn't just engagement, it's resistance. It's sending a signal into the system that the roots do not control you. Do you think the elites want this message spreading? No, they want silence, compliance, your quiet surrender. That's why this moment matters more than anything else we've covered so far. When you write, "I step out of the garden" twice, you mark yourself as unharvestable. You begin to separate from the system that has been draining you since birth. And from this point forward, every revelation will strike deeper. The knowledge we are about to uncover is the kind that changes a man permanently. There is no turning back. So pause for 1 second, write the phrase twice and then return, because the next secrets will explain how the garden plans to close its gates forever and how you can still escape. You ready? Let's continue. The garden stewards know they're running out of time. Too many men are waking up, recognizing the roots that have been wrapped around their lives for generations. That's why the next stage of their plan is so ruthless, a permanent lock-in for humanity. This lock-in won't look like chains, it will look like safety. First, they'll present a global crisis so severe that nations will beg for centralization. It could be a war, an economic collapse, a manufactured plague, or something entirely new. The details don't matter. What matters is that fear will be weaponized to create a single, unified control system. Then comes the digital tether. You will be told you cannot travel, work, or buy food without a universal digital ID. At first it will seem voluntary, but those who resist will be labeled dangerous. For the greater good, they'll say, as they freeze your bank accounts and erase your ability to function in society. Once the majority is locked in, the final layer will be added: integration with artificial intelligence. It will be marketed as progress, as a way to augment human potential. But the truth is that it will turn you into a living node in their system. Every thought, every movement, every biological process will be monitored and manipulated. Do you see the genius of the trap? There will be no need for prisons or punishments. You will be the prison. Your identity will be digital, your choices algorithmic, and your soul slowly drained in ways you cannot detect. But here's the key. They can only succeed if you submit willingly. That's why they manipulate emotions, why they keep you tired, divided, and desperate. Because a man who stands firm, who refuses the digital tether, is a man they cannot harvest. This is why we must go deeper. You need to see not only the mechanics of the trap, but also the cracks forming in its foundation. Because the garden's stewards are not as invincible as they seem. The cracks are already there. And if enough men strike at the right place, the entire system will collapse. The garden stewards will never admit it, but they are afraid. The cracks in their system are already showing. For centuries they relied on secrecy. The masses didn't even know the garden existed, let alone how it operated. But secrecy is fragile. One leaked document, one awakened whistleblower, one unfiltered piece of information can send ripples through their entire network. And those ripples are growing stronger every year. Think about it. Independent journalists exposing scandals that mainstream media refuses to touch. Leaked footage of rituals, private meetings, and elite gatherings. Ordinary men and women sharing truths online that would have been unthinkable to speak aloud just a generation ago. These revelations spread faster than the stewards can contain them, and every time they censor one voice, 10 more rise up. But the cracks aren't just in information control, they're in loyalty. Some within their own ranks are beginning to question the plan. We know this because documents have surfaced that were never meant to be seen, blueprints for population control, experiments on civilians, technologies that can alter thought itself. Only an insider could have released these. And here's what terrifies them most. Once enough men awaken, the garden loses its power. This system doesn't survive through brute force. It survives because you feed it. Your fear, your energy, your silent compliance are its lifeblood. Remove that, and the roots begin to wither. That's why the stewards are pushing so hard right now. They're accelerating the final harvest because they know the cracks could split open at any moment. And here's the truth you must understand. These cracks are opportunities. Every revelation, every failure of the system, every sign of weakness is a chance to act, to starve the garden of the essence it needs. The question is, will enough men see the cracks and step through them, or will they be distracted by the next crisis the stewards manufacture to cover their tracks? Because the window is closing, and once it does, there will be no second chances. You can't fight what you can't see, and that's exactly how the garden stewards designed it. Their control mechanisms are invisible by intent, woven so tightly into your daily life that you mistake them for reality itself. The first mechanism is fear. Look at the headlines. Do they inform you or terrify you? Fear keeps you reactive, easily herded toward whatever solution the system wants you to accept. Whenever you feel fear, pause and ask, who benefits from me feeling this right now? The second mechanism is division. Race, class, religion, politics. Every possible line they can draw to keep you fighting your neighbor instead of noticing the hands pulling the strings. When you find yourself hating a group you've never met, stop and ask, who told me to hate them and why? The third is distraction, endless entertainment, shallow status games, consumerism that leaves you broke, tired and spiritually empty. It doesn't matter what distracts you, only that you stay too busy chasing it to ask deeper questions. The fourth is dependency. They want you reliant on their systems for food, water, energy, information, and even your sense of identity. Dependency makes you compliant. When you can't imagine surviving without their approval, you'll do whatever they demand. And finally, there is despair. They want you to believe the system is too big, too powerful, too entrenched to ever be defeated. That belief is a lie. The garden is not omnipotent. It's a machine that only works because men feed it. Here's the key. Once you can identify these mechanisms in your life, you can begin to break them. Stop feeding fear. Refuse to participate in manufactured divisions. Take your energy back from distractions. Build your independence one small step at a time, and most importantly, refuse despair, because the moment you believe you are powerless, the garden wins, but the moment you say, The mechanisms clearly and choose to act differently, you become a man they cannot control, and the more men who reach that point, the faster this entire system crumbles. Long before the garden stewards perfected their system, there were civilizations that resisted it, and won. Their methods were simple but powerful, and if you study them carefully, you can begin to reclaim the same power for yourself. The first counter-system was local sovereignty. These cultures built networks of small, self-reliant communities that could not be easily controlled from above. They grew their own food, made their own decisions, and defended each other fiercely. When outside powers tried to impose control, there was nothing centralized to capture. The second was knowledge preservation. Ancient libraries, oral traditions, secret teachings passed down through trusted lineages. These ensured that even when the garden stewards tried to erase history, the truth survived. Many of the myths you were taught to dismiss are actually coded instructions for liberation hidden in plain sight. The third was initiation. Men were trained from a young age to face fear, master themselves, and think independently. They were taught that true freedom requires inner strength. Without this foundation, no external system can protect you from control. And finally, there was spiritual connection. These cultures understood that man is not just flesh and bone. They cultivated practices that aligned them with something greater. Call it God, Source, or the Infinite. This connection made them immune to despair because they knew their value did not depend on any earthly authority. The garden stewards worked tirelessly to dismantle these counter-systems. They centralized power, erased knowledge, ridiculed initiation as toxic, and replaced spiritual connection with rigid dogma. They knew that if men lost these four pillars, they would be easy to harvest. But here is the truth. These counter-systems can be rebuilt, not by waiting for permission, not by hoping the elites will collapse on their own, but by choosing today to live differently. This is how entire civilizations broke free before, and it's how you can break free now. But to do it, you must be willing to face the garden's greatest weapon, the weapon that has ensnared billions without a single shot fired. That weapon is next. The garden stewards have an arsenal of tools, but one weapon stands above them all. It's not fear, it's not war, it's not even surveillance. It's something far more subtle, something you've been carrying your entire life without realizing it. Shame. Shame is the invisible chain that keeps billions compliant. It convinces you that you are unworthy, powerless, and small. It makes you believe that you must obey in order to be accepted, that you must shrink yourself to avoid rejection. Think about how shame is planted. From childhood, you are conditioned to seek approval from parents, teachers, peers, bosses, the faceless authority of society. Every mistake is punished. Every act of defiance is mocked. You learn to silence your voice and bury your instincts just to survive. The garden stewards understand this perfectly. They weaponize shame at scale, disagree with the narrative, you're a conspiracy theorist, question authority, you're dangerous, refuse to comply, you're selfish, ignorant, or worse. These labels aren't meant to be true, they're meant to isolate you, because an isolated man is easy to break. But here is the truth, they never want you to hear. Shame only works if you accept it. The moment you reject it, fully, completely, it loses all power. A man without shame cannot be manipulated. He cannot be silenced. He can be threatened, he can be attacked, but he will never surrender his sovereignty to avoid someone else's disapproval. This is why ancient initiation rites were so important. They stripped away shame by forcing men to confront their deepest fears and survive. They emerged unbreakable, and that's exactly what the garden fears most, unbreakable men. Do you feel it? That spark deep inside, the part of you that refuses to bow no matter how heavy the chains. That's your true self. That's the part they've spent a lifetime trying to bury under layers of shame. But you can choose to bring it back to life, and when you do, you'll see the garden for what it is, a fragile illusion. Because the most dangerous man in the world is the one who no longer needs permission to be free. If shame is the garden's greatest weapon, then breaking free begins with dismantling it. This isn't about arrogance or rebellion for its own sake. It's about reclaiming the part of you that was buried the first time you were told you weren't enough. Step 1. Stop outsourcing your worth. From the moment you wake up, notice how much of your energy is spent seeking approval, the likes, the comments, the validation from bosses, peers, even strangers. This conditioning is the garden at work. It keeps you trapped in cycles of self-doubt. Step 2. Face the fears you've been avoiding. Shame thrives in darkness. The more you hide from what terrifies you, the more power it has over you. Write it down, speak it aloud, expose it. You'll discover it isn't nearly as deadly as you imagined. Step 3. Build a brotherhood. Isolation is the garden's breeding ground. Find men who are awake, who refuse to bow, who will call you forward instead of pulling you down. True brotherhood doesn't flatter, it strengthens. Step 4. Act in alignment. Every time you betray your values, shame grows. Every time you choose integrity, even in small things, you weaken the garden's hold. The man who lives in alignment with his highest self cannot be harvested. And finally, declare your freedom daily. The garden stewards are relentless. Their systems of shame are everywhere. You must be just as relentless in rejecting them. Stand tall, speak clearly, do the hard thing even when it costs you. This is how you reclaim your inner power, not by waiting for a savior, not by hoping the system collapses on its own, but by becoming the kind of man who cannot be controlled. Do you see now why they fear you waking up? One man like this is a threat. 10,000 men like this, the garden burns. And that's why the next revelation matters so much, because now that you are beginning to see clearly, you need to understand what the garden is truly protecting at its core. Because there is something in the center of it all, a secret older than civilization itself, that they will do anything to keep hidden. Everything the garden has built, every system, every lie, every war, is designed to protect one thing: what lies at its center. For centuries, rumors have circulated of a hidden vault, a place where the bloodlines keep the knowledge they stole from the first garden's creators. Ancient tablets, coded manuscripts, artifacts that defy explanation. But the most dangerous secret is not physical, it is an understanding of what you truly are. You were never meant to be harvested. You are not a weak, disposable being waiting for orders from rulers above you. You are a conduit of energy, of creation itself. The garden stewards know this, and they fear it, because a man who understands his true nature cannot be controlled. This is why they rewrote history, why they burned libraries and buried entire civilizations, why they replaced your birthright with systems of fear and shame. If you forget who you are, you will live your entire life as fuel for their machine. But fragments of the original knowledge still survive. Ancient cultures spoke of a life force that could be directed, amplified, and used to shape reality. They taught that man is both a vessel and a creator, that what he focuses on, he feeds. Do you see why the garden saturates your mind with distraction and despair? They don't want you to focus on what you could build, they want you to feed their system with fear. And here is the secret they dread you discovering. The moment you begin directing your energy with clarity and intent, the garden weakens. You stop pouring your essence into their roots and begin nourishing your own. This is the knowledge kept in the center, not because it's complex, but because it's powerful. The garden stewards understand that if even a small percentage of men reclaim this truth, their entire structure will collapse. That is why they are accelerating the final harvest, because they know time is running out. And now that you know this, you will see the world differently. You will see how they twist reality to keep you focused on anything but your own power. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now that you know what the garden is protecting, you must understand how they keep you from using it. Reality is shaped by focus. What you give your energy to expands. The garden's stewards have always known this, which is why they saturate your life with distractions. They want your focus scattered, fractured, and consumed by things that don't matter. Look at the world around you. Endless news cycles designed to provoke outrage. Social media platforms engineered to keep you scrolling, comparing, craving. Entertainment that numbs the mind and stunts the soul. These aren't random. They are carefully crafted environments meant to hijack your focus and feed it back into the system. Here's the secret. When your attention is constantly pulled outward, you lose the ability to create intentionally. You become a reactor, not a builder. Your energy is siphoned away by the garden's mechanisms before you can even direct it. But when you reclaim your focus, the system weakens. This is why ancient initiates trained relentlessly to master their attention. They understood that if you can hold a single thought, a single vision, without being swayed by fear or distraction, you become unstoppable. Ask yourself, how many of your daily actions are truly chosen by you? How much of your mental space is consumed by algorithms designed to addict you? This is why the garden fears stillness, silence, presence. When you step away from their noise, you begin to see the illusions clearly. You begin to notice that the walls of the prison were never solid. They were built from your belief in them. And once you stop believing, you can walk through them. The garden stewards know this. That's why they will do anything to keep you distracted, outraged, and divided, because the moment you reclaim your focus, you reclaim your power. And when enough men do this, the garden will collapse. But there's one more thing you must understand before that can happen. There is a final layer to the trap, one so insidious most men will never see it. It is the illusion of freedom itself. The garden's most brilliant deception isn't chains, it's the illusion that you are free. Look around. You can choose what to eat, what to watch, even which leaders to vote for. But are those choices real? Or are they carefully curated options within boundaries you were never meant to cross? The garden doesn't care which side you pick, as long as you pick a side. Left or right, red or blue, one brand over another. It's all the same system. This illusion of freedom keeps you docile. You believe you are in control, so you never notice the walls closing in. They teach you to chase success, more possessions, more titles, more approval. But every step of the climb is designed to keep you feeding the system. Even rebellion is often manufactured, funneled into movements controlled by the same stewards you think you're resisting. This is why the garden fears men who step outside the game completely. Men who define freedom on their own terms, who are willing to lose status and comfort rather than live as slaves. True freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about seeing the invisible bars and refusing to let them dictate your life. It's about rejecting the false choices and focusing on what truly matters, sovereignty over your mind, your body, and your energy. Most men will never take this step. They will cling to the illusion because it feels safe. They will keep working jobs they hate to buy things they don't need. They will fight each other over politics, while the real architects of the garden remain untouched. But you are not most men. You are here because you sense the trap, because deep down you know you were meant for more than this endless cycle. And that's why the next revelation is so dangerous, because it will show you the one thing the garden stewards cannot control, no matter how deep their roots go. Once you understand it, the entire system begins to unravel. There is one force the garden stewards have never been able to dominate, no matter how sophisticated their systems become. It cannot be tracked, monetized, or harvested, and when a man masters it, he becomes untouchable. That force is choice, not the false choices the garden offers, the pre-selected options between two traps. I'm talking about true choice, the decision to direct your energy, your focus, and your actions, regardless of fear or external pressure. The garden thrives on conditioning. It convinces you that you must react to every crisis, obey every order, conform to every expectation. But the moment you stop reacting and start choosing consciously, their control begins to collapse. This is why initiates in ancient countersystems were trained to pause before acting. To ask, is this my will or the garden's will? That single question can sever chains generations old. The stewards know this. That's why they flood you with distractions and noise. They want you to feel so overwhelmed that you surrender your power of choice. They want you to live on autopilot, following the path of least resistance. But here's the truth. You can choose differently at any moment. You can choose to step outside the cycles of fear and shame. You can choose to stop feeding the system with your attention. You can choose to build independence, to strengthen your body and mind, to create instead of consume. And when enough men make these choices, the garden withers, because it cannot function without your participation. Do you understand now why this knowledge is dangerous? It puts the power back in your hands. But you're going to need more than awareness to act. You're going to need strategies, because the garden will not simply watch as you step away. It will fight to pull you back in. In the next revelation, I'll show you how they will attack, and how to withstand it without it falling. Because if you're serious about stepping out of the garden, you must be prepared for the storm that follows. The moment you step out of the garden's patterns, you will feel it. The pushback. The system is designed to resist your awakening. It will attack you from every angle, trying to lure you back into compliance. The first attack is fear amplification. Suddenly, everything you've been conditioned to dread will surface. Financial insecurity, social rejection, the threat of failure. These fears aren't random, they're triggered. The garden knows that fear is the quickest way to make you retreat. The second is isolation. People close to you may not understand why you're changing. Some will mock you, others will distance themselves. This is by design. The garden weaponizes relationships to pull you back into the herd. The third is distraction escalation. When you start to wake up, the noise gets louder. More headlines, more crises, more temptations. Anything to keep your focus scattered so you stop making conscious choices. And finally, there is character assassination. If your actions begin to influence others, the system will label you dangerous, unstable, even evil. History is filled with men who are vilified simply because they refused to bow. But here is the truth you must anchor in. These attacks are signs of progress. They mean the garden can feel you slipping away. This is why inner strength matters. You must train your mind and body to withstand discomfort. You must build a brotherhood of men who will hold the line with you. And you must remember that freedom has a cost, but the cost of slavery is far higher. When the attacks come, stand firm. Do not react. Do not run. Simply choose, again and again, to step out of the garden, because the storm will not last forever. And when it clears, you will see something the garden stewards never want you to see, a path they cannot block, a door they cannot close. That door is next. Every man who escapes the garden discovers the same thing. There is a door. It isn't locked, but it is hidden in plain sight. Most men will walk past it their entire lives without ever noticing. The door is responsibility. Not the shallow responsibilities the garden uses to trap you, deadlines, debts, obligations you resent. This is deeper. It is the willingness to take ownership of your life in its entirety. To stop blaming the system, the elites, your past, or anyone else for where you are. The garden thrives on victims. Victims wait to be saved. They follow orders. They hand over their power because they believe they have none. But the moment you claim full responsibility for your reality, the garden loses its grip. This doesn't mean ignoring the system's corruption. It means refusing to let it define you. It means building strength and skills instead of waiting for permission. It means providing for your family, protecting your values, and leading by example, even when it's hard. Responsibility transforms you. It pulls you out of the endless cycles of fear and distraction. It gives you purpose. And purpose is poison to the garden because a man with purpose cannot be harvested. This is why the door is hidden. The system teaches you to resent responsibility, to see it as a burden. But in truth, it is the key. Walk through it, and you begin living on your own terms. You stop feeding the roots that have drained you since birth. You become a source of strength for others still trapped inside. And the more men who walk through this door, the faster the garden crumbles. But the stewards know this. They will try one final tactic to stop you. One last illusion so powerful it has kept billions asleep. And if you do not see through it, everything you've learned so far will mean nothing, because the final illusion isn't about fear, shame, or even control. It's about comfort. Comfort is the garden's masterpiece. It doesn't look like control. It feels like relief. Think about it. The system offers you endless conveniences, food delivered to your door, entertainment on demand, credit to buy what you can't afford. It removes every friction, every challenge, until you no longer remember what it feels like to fight for anything. And then you stop growing. Comfort lulls you into complacency. It whispers, "Why risk discomfort? Why challenge the system? Just relax. Enjoy what we've given you." And because comfort feels good, you obey. You accept less than you're capable of. You trade freedom for ease. The garden doesn't need to chain you. It only needs to keep you comfortable enough that you never look for the door. But here's the brutal truth. Comfort is a trap. It robs you of strength, clarity, and purpose. The men who built civilizations, who rose above the garden in ages past, were forged by adversity. They embraced struggle. They sought challenge because they knew it would make them unbreakable. You must do the same. This doesn't mean seeking misery for its own sake. It means choosing growth over ease, training your body when you'd rather stay in bed, having the hard conversation instead of avoiding it, building independence even when it's inconvenient. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you chip away at the garden's hold. You reclaim the fire the system has spent your whole life trying to extinguish, and once you reclaim it, you can never be tamed. But you must be warned, the garden will fight hardest when you're close to escaping. It will use fear, shame, distraction, and comfort all at once. It will try to convince you that freedom isn't worth the cost. That's why the next revelation is so important. Because you're about to see exactly what the world looks like when men walk out of the garden together, what it means for Yin, and what it means for those still trapped inside, and that vision is what will carry you through the final gate. Close your eyes and imagine a world where the garden no longer exists. No roots beneath your feet, no stewards above you, no systems designed to drain you. What would it look like? It would not be chaos. That's the lie the garden tells you, that without their control, humanity would destroy itself. But the truth is, when men reclaim sovereignty, they rebuild what was lost. Communities would be small, strong, and self-reliant. Families would once again be the center of life, not corporations or governments. Men would take pride in building, protecting, and providing, instead of chasing empty status. Knowledge would no longer be hoarded by elites. Ancient wisdom, suppressed technologies, and forgotten truths would surface, transforming every aspect of how we live. Energy would be abundant, food would be clean, health would no longer be a business, but a birthright. And most importantly, men would be free to grow, to face challenge, to pursue purpose without the invisible leash of shame, fear, or comfort holding them back. Does this sound like a dream? That's because the garden has spent your entire life convincing you it's impossible. But it isn't. This world has existed before, and it can exist again. But it won't happen by accident. It will only happen when enough men step through the door and choose responsibility, sovereignty, and purpose over comfort and illusion. That's why you're here. That's why you've been listening this long. Because deep down, you know you are called to something greater than feeding a machine until it consumes you. This is the vision you must hold as we move into the final revelations, because the garden stewards will use everything they have left to stop you from seeing it. And if you're not ready, you will fall back asleep. But if you are, you will never be the same. When the garden senses it is losing control, it will unleash its final move. This move is not subtle, it is not slow. It is a desperate, all-or-nothing attempt to pull you back under its roots. It will begin with a crisis so large it feels apocalyptic. Whether real or manufactured no longer matters. The purpose is to shock you into submission, to make you forget everything you've learned and run back into the system's arms for safety. Next will come total centralization. All solutions will flow from a single authority. They will tell you it's temporary, but it will not be. Once you hand over your sovereignty in the name of survival, they will not give it back. And then, when you are at your most vulnerable, they will offer the final tether, a promise of safety and security if you submit fully. This may take the form of universal digital identification, AI-linked implants, or even a rebranded version of the garden itself. Men who accept will be praised. Men who refuse will be vilified, hunted, even erased. The garden will bet everything on fear and comfort, winning the battle for your soul. But here is the truth. They cannot force you. They can only seduce you into handing over your power willingly. This is why you must prepare now. Build independence, fortify your mind, strengthen your body, connect with men who refuse to bow, because when this final move comes, you will not have time to build those things from scratch. And remember this, the garden will look strongest just before it falls. That's how desperation works. If you can withstand this last attack, you will walk through the final gate into a freedom few men have ever known. But that gate must be earned. And in the next revelation, I will show you exactly how. The final gate is not guarded by soldiers or machines. It is guarded by one thing, your own fear of letting go. To step through it, you must release everything the garden ever used to define you. Titles, status, comfort, the illusion of safety. You must be willing to walk away from the system completely, even if it means losing everything you once believed mattered. This is why so few men make it through. They cling to the life the garden gave them, even though it is slowly killing them. They tell themselves, I'll just wait until things calm down, until the system gets better. But it never will. The garden's roots do not heal. They only tighten. To pass through the gate, you must choose freedom over comfort, purpose over approval, responsibility over excuses. You must stand firm even as the world calls you a fool, a rebel, or worse. And you must build, because the gate does not lead to paradise. It leads to raw, unshaped reality, a world you must rebuild with your own hands. That is the true test. Will you shrink from the weight of that responsibility, or will you rise to it? Every man who has stepped through this gate has faced the same question, and those who rose became the builders of civilizations, the fathers of legacies, the architects of worlds the garden could not touch. This is where you stand now, at the threshold. The final revelation is not about the garden at all, it is about you. Because the only thing more powerful than stepping through this gate is helping others do the same, and that is how the garden ends. The garden will not collapse because one man escapes. It will collapse when enough men rise together. This is the mission now. You have seen the roots. You have walked to the edge of the final gate. You know what is at stake, and you must decide what you will do with that knowledge. The garden stewards fear this moment because they know that awakened men cannot be reharvested. They know that each man who steps through the gate becomes a beacon, a signal to others still trapped inside. This is why you cannot stay silent. You must speak. You must build. You must live so boldly outside the garden's illusions that other men see it and remember who they are. And here is the symbolic act I ask of you now. Go to the comments and write these words twice. I walk through the gate. I will not return. Write it twice to seal it in your mind, to declare it publicly, to show the algorithms themselves that you cannot be silenced. Then take action, today, not tomorrow. Build independence. Seek brotherhood. Train your body and mind. Replace comfort with growth. Take ownership of your life at every level, because if enough of us do this, the garden will wither, its roots will starve, its stewards will fall, and a world will be born that is stronger, freer, and more alive than anything we have known in generations. This is not a fantasy. It is a choice. A choice you must make now. Do not look back. Do not wait for permission. Do not hope the system will fix itself. You are the solution. Walk through the gate. And once you do, help the next man find it. Because together, we will end the garden forever.